Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone, episode number 558, for the 30th of June 2019. Richard Saunders here, coming to you live from the Squaring the Strange studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And with me is one of the hosts of Squaring the Strange. You know him well from previous interviews on the Skeptic Zone. It's Ben Radford.
Here I am. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, hello, Ben. And what a thrill it is to visit Albuquerque, to see you, and to be in the Squaring the Strange studios. This is quite an experience.
Yes, it's not quite as fancy as your studio, but it suffices.
You haven't seen my studio.
I've seen video when I Skype with you.
That's true, and I'm very pleased to say, folks, that this studio comes complete with cat.
Lots of books, lots of odd things, everything from chupacabras to evil clowns, crystal skulls, all manner of weirdness.
It is a weird office. It really is. It's a delight to be here. Later on, we're going to look around Albuquerque. And after that, today, what a treat for me. I'm going to be a special guest on Squaring the Strange.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you on.
For a recording session for that. So it's a big day. We're recording the Skeptic Zone in the morning and Squaring the Strange in the afternoon. But I'm sure you just can't wait to find out what's coming up on the Skeptic Zone this week.
Yes, absolutely.
I can tell.
He said nervously.
Okay. What an interesting show we have for you. Later on, Ben, later on in the show, you and I will be discussing the case of Psychic Detectives, one of my pet
one of your
subjects.
Bugaboos.
Bugaboos.
Yes, one of mine as well.
Bugaboos. Is this an Albuquerque expression?
No, it's I think it's a British one, but both being colonies, former colonies, yes. Bugaboos.
Bugaboos. We're going to look back into the 1930s. A report about psychic detectives, even way back then. I had no idea until I was doing some research that these people have been pestering police for so long.
It's a long time to be wasting police resources and diverting important attention from where the missing people actually are.
Where we are. And it's been such a fascinating thing. And even this morning, doing a bit of research, I came across an episode of In Search of Leonard Nimoy talking about psychic detectives. I'll probably link to that on the show notes. That's coming up later on in the show. Also later on the show, our occasional guest reporter, Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. She's going to be speaking to Tony Ortega, who is involved with post-Scientology work. In fact, I have not been very familiar with this until now. Do you know somewhat more about it?
I know a little bit about it. We don't, out here in New Mexico, we don't have, everyone here, there's Scientologists everywhere, but it's particularly prevalent, of course, in Los Angeles and New York and the bigger places. But yeah, certainly with the hit that Scientology has taken over the past few years, with, Leah Remini and documentaries coming out that have really given Scientology a black eye after many years of basically being, invincible. There's more and more people that are coming out and are helping people transition out of these sorts of things.
It's fascinating. And thank you, Susan, for sending me the report, folks. I think you'll enjoy listening to this towards the end of the show. We're going to kick off the show, however, coming up after this, with a report from Trish Hann, our reporter in Sydney, and her segment Trish and Chips. The so-called psychic Sally Morgan,
yes,
the British psychic, was recently, and she could still be doing the rounds in Australia as we record live psychic shows. Trish and Jessica Singer from the Australian Skeptics and Dr. Brad Mackay turned up at the theatre and were involved in handing out leaflets to people before they went in, advising them what to look out for.
I like that. that. When Sylvia Brown, convicted felon Sylvia Brown, of course, when she came to town here in Albuquerque, myself and some of the local skeptics went and took it upon ourselves to help advertise her show. And so when ahead of her show, when she played at a local casino, we put out banners saying "Convicted felon Sylvia Brown this way." So we wanted to make sure that the people who were coming for the show knew where to go.
Very good.
We never got a thank you. Oh. Not an invite to a show. Not a thank you. Just just cold stares from the staff.
Skeptics are such helpful people, folks. They really are. And included in that report is a reading of the flyer, the text from the flyer, so people can hear for themselves what the Skeptics were handing out in Sydney. As I said, folks, it's what a thrill it is to be in a different studio. And a real podcasting studio here, folks. It's such a... Stop laughing, Ben.
It's high tech.
It is high tech.
He said, looking around at... I think there's actually a couple cassette tapes right behind you. There may be a VHS tape around here somewhere if you look close enough.
Let's not get carried away.
Okay.
I tell you what. What's this? Oh, they're video cassette tapes. My goodness me. Yes, Granddad told me about those. Now,
ouch! Oh!
But now it's time for you and I to run out the door, jump into the car, and you're going to feed me some green chili, I think, today or something.
Yes, one of our local crops. When people think green, they often think of marijuana, but we're actually to be talking about green chili.
Green chili.
Yes, there's different types of chili. There's red and green chili. They're actually the same chili, just depends on when you harvest it. But that's what our state is known for, is our spicy chilies, and they're delicious.
Well, even when you picked me up from the airport and I'm looking around thinking, wow, this is interesting. I look at the car in front of us and on the number plate is the green and red chili.
It's been said that our local, our state question is red or green. Meaning, if you order food, red or green, what do you want? The assumption is you want chili on it. Doesn't matter if it's, eggs, pancakes, ice cream. The default is you want chili on it.
I think I've come to the right place. Why we do that. I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Let's have some Trish and chips. Here's Trish Hann.
Around 5 years ago, a polite chap called Mark Tilbrook engaged in some sceptical activism and handed out some informational flyers to audience members as they filed into a Psychic Sally show in the UK. On the first night in Manchester, he was threatened and abused by members of the crew, so on the next night he reached out to the Merseyside Skeptics for some backup in Liverpool. And even though he wasn't alone this time, he was still hassled. You may have heard about what happened a while later at the London show. You may have even seen the news reports or YouTube video. If not, I'll ask Richard to post some links. I saw it happening in real time as I sat nearby, acting as a witness, pretending to be waiting for a mate, and it was really quite scary. Sally Morgan's husband and son-in-law came out and verbally abused Mark multiple times, including at one point charging at him and chasing him backwards into the road. Fast forward to last week, and on the other side of the world, a small group of Australian skeptics are standing outside the State Theatre in Sydney, handing out a very familiar-looking leaflet outside a Psychic Sally show. I'd spent ages planning and plotting to make sure that we would be safe this time, both physically and legally. Myself and Jessica Singer strategically positioned ourselves either side of the entrance, with Brad Mackay as our witness covertly watching from the other side of the street. We had secret sound recording equipment just in case of a confrontation, we had signals we would use in case of trouble, and Brad was ready to start filming as soon as anything dodgy happened. And nothing happened. One audience member got a little bit shirty with Jessica, asking why we were bothering. She replied that we bother because we think it's important, and that was about it. Oh, and someone else thought I was a Scientologist, which was a first for me personally. So all those precautions, all that preparation, my heart rate didn't go beneath 100 BPM for most of the evening. For nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. Our aim, and the aim of all activists, should be to educate. I'd guesstimate that we handed out flyers to about 100 people, which is around a quarter of the audience. By the way, the State Theatre seats 2,000, so make of that what you will. The content of the flyer, which Richard will read for you now, is deliberately verbose and not overtly anti-psychic. Again, this was very strategic.
Look after yourself.
There are people who say they can speak with loved ones after they have passed away. Some will make it clear that the shows are for, quote, entertainment purposes only, end quote. If you're here tonight simply for entertainment, then no harm can be done, and you should relax and enjoy the performance. The chances are, though, that you have lost someone close to you, and you're looking for a way to hear from them or contact them again. If this is you, it's important to make sure you are not tricked or misled into something that may not be real. Easy steps you can take tonight. To make sure you are looking after yourself and not being deceived, you can simply ask yourself the following questions during the performance. How broad and generic are the statements and questions? Often the psychic might ask for someone whose name begins with a letter. Quote, who is the father figure with the S name? Steve? Stan? End quote. And will make very broad statements before getting narrower. Why would they do this if they are already hearing from a specific person? They should be able to say, quote, I'm hearing from Sam Jones, who died from liver disease in April 2016. He was a plumber, and he says his wife is Mary Jones, end quote. How likely is it that the statements or questions apply to at least one person? If the psychic makes a statement, how accurate is it? If they say that an elderly person had a bad back, or asks, quote, who is it that had cancer, end quote, or, quote, who is it that had chest problems, end quote, these are likely to apply to lots of people and will match someone in an audience of hundreds. Be careful about giving information. Some psychics ask guests to fill out information cards beforehand and will have people listening to conversations before the show. If the psychic can genuinely speak to a loved one, you don't need to give them any information before or during the show. How many statements and questions are incorrect? As the psychic is making statements or simply asking many questions, are they getting straight to a correct one, or are they listing lots of other things that are incorrect? The focus will always be drawn to the correct statements and incorrect guesses dismissed quickly. But if you can count the number of things the psychic says that are incorrect, it becomes less surprising if they eventually say something correct. If you want to find out more about the people who claim to speak with the dead, you can watch these videos at tinyurl.com/psychic shows and tinyurl.com/aboutcoldreading, or go to www.skeptic.com/medium.html for a good starting point. Ask questions and be skeptical about any information you read, both for and against psychics or mediums. www.skeptics.com.au.
The text is non-confrontational, and a lot of the statements made in the flyer were things that plenty of psychics actually say themselves. In fact, famous American psychic John Edwards said in the Sydney Morning Herald last week, quote, you shouldn't be providing information. If you are dealing with a psychic, a card reader or a medium, your job is to let them give you the information, end quote. We didn't see any of our flyers on the street or the foyer floor as we left, so hopefully those who have them had a chance to read them before the show or during the interval. And if even one person recognised something from our information in the show, I'm happy we didn't waste our time. You'll never change someone's mind by telling them they've just given their time and money to a con artist. They'll just double down and become defensive. It's normal human behaviour. Often, the best way to reach people, outside of life and death scenarios, is to give them the information and let them come to their own conclusion at their own pace. There's no big rush here. Psychics have been around for centuries, and while their popularity seems to be waning, I guarantee you they'll be coming to an empty theatre or RSL club near you soon. If you'd like to get involved in similar activism in your area but don't know where to start, please feel free to contact me via the Skeptic Zone, and I'd be happy to give you some help to do so safely and effectively. This is Trish Hann for the Skeptic Zone.
Sweet cappuccino. Soy latte.
Hey, Richard.
Oh, hi, Trish. Hi. Would you like a coffee?
Yeah, thanks. What are you working on?
I'm trying to come up with a new promo to play on the Skeptic Zone.
Who's it for?
The Good Thinking Society in the UK. You know, the...
Oh, yeah, I know them. The guys who recently chased the homeopaths out of the UK public health system.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they campaigned and lobbied government for a while, and now you cannot get homeopathy on the NHS. So they can now spend public money on healthcare that works.
Oh, right. Look, I'll mention that in the promo. Now, their website is goodthinkingsociety.org.
And that website is a good resource for learning more about quackery.
Ah, thanks, Trish. That gives me something good to think about.
Psychic Detectives. Psychic Detectives, it's something we discuss more frequently on the Skeptic Zone. I'm with Ben Radford once again. Hello, Ben.
Hello, hello.
Thank you for joining me here in your studios for this segment on Psychic Detectives. And this time we're going to look back, and I'm going to pick your brains a little bit, into the history of Psychic Detectives. I mean, there are the current crop. In Australia, I can think of Debbie Malone as the most prominent at the moment, and she has been for a while, of people who think they have psychic powers or whatever. And in this country, was Sylvia Brown going around big-mouthing herself as a psychic detective?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, from my research, depending on how formal you consider psychic detectives to be. So, for example, the Ouija board. Of course, was very popular, and it was used during World Wars for people to try and contact the people overseas. And in many cases, people would buy Ouija boards with the idea that they would, be communicating, because of course, this is before mass communication, so their loved ones would be overseas, and they wouldn't know if they're alive or they're dead. I mean, it could take weeks to hear back. And so, in a way, you could look at them. I mean, they didn't claim to be psychic, but they believed the board was psychic, the spirit board. And so you can sort of go back and look at that as being an early version of psychic detectives. But again, it's a bit different because they're not people who are making their living on it.
Yeah.
And of course, you had the spiritualists, all the people who'd go around and do their shows and their productions. In some cases, of course, claiming to communicate with the dead. You had people like William Mumler, the photographer, who would, although not claiming to be psychic themselves, would offer to do spirit photographs and in a sense, put people in photographs and in communication with them. But in terms of like the modern psychic detectives, there's Noreen Rainier, very famous. Sylvia Brown. For a lot of them, it was sort of a side job. Where they had built up a reputation as being psychic anyway, and as part of that, they would go and inject themselves into high profile cases.
Well, if we're thinking in the last 10 years ago, it was Alison Devois, wasn't it? And you don't hear much about her anymore, I don't think.
No, I mean she's she's still around somewhere. And they don't go away. They're just, they sort of do second tier stuff. James Van Prague is still around somewhere. John Edward is still the rubber duck syndrome. He's still bouncing around. And I think last I heard, you said he's visiting Australia.
So. Yes. He's John Edward has his Australian run, which he's been doing now for well over a decade, where he'll turn up about this time of the year, mid-year in Australia where it's winter. And he'll do about a week's worth of publicity for his tour in normally November. So he'll go straight onto the chat shows, straight into the radio studio. The producers welcome him with open arms because they know people will listen and people will watch. Works well for John Edward. He gets his pre-publicity.
Absolutely.
People get interested. 6 months later, he turns up and does his live shows. 6 months after that, he comes again the following year and does it all over again. Year after year after year, and it really doesn't matter much what the skeptics say.
Well, I can tell you that I had Celestia Ward, my co-host on Scoring the Strange, and we had gone undercover to one of his shows about 2 or 3 years ago, and I was pleasantly surprised at how small his audience was. It was a local hotel, and I didn't know what to expect. I'd been to other psychic readings, but not recently, and certainly not John Edward. But when I went in there, I mean, there were a couple hundred people, but there weren't thousands. And it was interesting and slightly pleasing to me.
well, I mean, he isn't what he was because his big days are over with his regular
crossing
TV
over
show.
the
Crossing
TV
over.
show, yeah.
Although that still carries him a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Because, the TV psychic or whatever.
Right.
And of course, like all of them, he can simply make claims which can't be instantly fact-checked at the moment. And a classic example of John Edward, and I know we're straying from the point, folks, but that's all right, it's my show. A classic example, and I was just discussing this with you yesterday, in fact, that, and my memory fails me, I don't remember if I saw it on a TV clip or if he said this during an ad break on a show years ago when I was in the audience. This was a show called Mornings with Kerry Ann, morning chat show in Australia. It's defunct now. And John Edward was the guest and, welcomed with open arms. And it's quite possible during an ad break, chatting to Kerry Ann, he said something along the lines of, when I flew over here, I was waiting backstage and the monitor was flickering in the green room. Oh, that happens all the time. When I'm on airplanes, things flicker and go wrong because of
glitches.
Glitches, obviously, because of his enormous psychic ability.
Well, obviously.
And I thought to myself, yeah, like I'm going to get on a plane with somebody who can affect the electronics of a plane, right?
Yeah. If you really think that Uri Geller can bend metal with his mind and he has all this power, I don't want to be on a plane with him. That's not whether he's intending to or not. For all I know, he's going to bend a wing, and we're all going down.
Yeah, and it's the classic. People can make these claims and statements, and people, really, that's amazing. Like Alison Devois. I was in another time. I think I was in the audience or saw it on TV. Again, my memory fails me. And she made this claim. She said her daughter is psychic too. Oh, really? Said the host. Yeah, my daughter can get a shuffled deck of cards, and she knows what each card is before she flips it over. That's amazing.
Wow.
That's really? Care to demonstrate this?
Do tell. There's video of this, I hope.
Yeah. So people can make all these amazing claims, and it's just taken. Of course. Yeah, that's what the psychic says. Anyway, we sort of veered off a little bit from our topic. I want to now read out, which is a little pre-recorded clip, a report from the Australian Woman's Weekly going back to 1935. 1935, and it's on the topic of psychic detectives.
I wouldn't have expected... I would have thought that psychic detectives per se were a much more recent phenomenon. I'm surprised it goes back that far.
Me too. Let's have a listen. Now, last week we brought you a report from the Australian Woman's Weekly dating back to 1977 about ESP. Also on last week's show we covered the topic of psychic detectives, and this prompted me to do a further search in the archives of the Australian Woman's Weekly, and I found a fascinating story dating back to 1935 in the 26th of January issue. Stargazers who want to solve crimes. Albury and Inverloch tragedies attract clairvoyants and seers. Every unsolved murder brings to light a crop of clairvoyants, teacup readers, dreamers, astrologers, and so forth, who claim to have gained, through occult powers, possession of clues which unravel the mystery. The police department is inundated with letters from them. It's wonderful how they keep coming in. A detective sergeant of long experience in murder cases told the Australian Woman's Weekly, because the writers are not encouraged, and in no single instance known to me has anything of value come from them. For nearly 5 months, the police of Victoria and New South Wales have been receiving letters from clairvoyants in reference to the Albury murder at the beginning of August last year. And that would have been 1934. Some of these letters are from persons who profess, while in a state of sleep or
coma to have seen the crime committed. There have been descriptions forwarded to the police of the person or persons alleged to have been seen by the writers disposing of the body of the unknown girl. Another crop of clairvoyance has come to light as a result of the Inverloch tragedy in Victoria in the first week of January. A girl of 12 was spirited away from a picnic party and done to death. Efforts to find the slayer have so far been unavailing, but a weird assortment of letters has reached the Victorian authorities, some tendering advice, some professing to describe the killer, some giving the locality where he is to be found. Australian detectives are hard-headed men who have neither the time nor the inclination for chasing chimeras, but no letter in relation to crime goes unread. No matter how fantastic the statements, there is always the chance of something actually emerging. An astrologer's prediction. One of the letters received by the Victorian police came from a Mr. E. V. Seepin, a professed astrologist. He has lately been elected president of the Astrological Society of Australia. In December last, he wrote an article in which he predicted a mysterious crime against a child in early January. The crime has been committed, and it must have seemed to Mr. Seepin, as a good astrologist, that he should probe further. Last week he forwarded to the Victorian police a description of the slayer of the girl. The description was compiled from the dead girl's birth chart. Here is the description as it appeared in the Melbourne and Sydney newspapers. Medium height, straight-backed, long, thin face, high forehead, long nose, thick brown or black hair. The above details are precise. It is added that the murderer may be swarthy, and he may have long arms and hands, and may be a man whose most solemn protestations cannot be believed. The whole of Australia was stirred by what was known as the Hornsby murder in 1919. A bank official was killed in a train proceeding from Sydney to Hornsby, and the slayer was never brought to book. And as an aside, Hornsby is a far north suburb of Sydney. We read on. But quite a number of clairvoyants professed to have seen him. A photograph of the hammer with which the deed was supposed to have been committed appeared in the papers, and a clairvoyant wrote to the police to say that he had seen this hammer transmuted into a likeness of the murderer's face. Tea lovers too. Only a few days ago, a detective informed us, a woman asked me if she could see the body of the Albury girl whose identity we are trying to establish. I asked her reason. She said if she could see the girl's face, she would be able to help the search by consulting tea leaves. Needless to say, I told her she need not bother. And that was Stargazers Who Want to Solve Crimes, published in the Australian Woman's Weekly on the 26th of January 1935. And it certainly goes to show that the police and other authorities have been plagued by the so-called psychics for decades and decades, probably well over 100 years. Insofar as the story talks about the Albury murder, it seems that this, in fact, was the case of Linda Agostini, very famously known in the annals of Australian crime as the Pyjama Girl, because she was discovered wearing a set of Chinese-style pyjamas. But it took over 10 years for her killer to be brought to justice, and that turned out to be her husband, Tony Agostini, who was convicted of the murder or manslaughter, as it happened, served some years in prison, and then was deported back to Italy. The investigation revolved around dental records and the body being on view to the public. It wasn't straightforward. The police apparently bungled it somewhat by miscounting the number of fillings as compared to dental records, but eventually the case was solved. but you can read the original report for yourself in the pages of the Australian Woman's Weekly, and I'll certainly add a link in this week's show notes.
So there you go, Ben, all the way back to 1935. And it's interesting, stargazers who want to solve crimes, and the term psychic detective wasn't, really wasn't born then yet or used or whatever. And I love this term. Clairvoyance is an old term.
Seers.
But seers was a very popular term until a couple of decades ago. The word seer instead of psychic. Because when we look at the case of the Beaumont children from 1966 and the Dutch clairvoyant who came out, he was widely billed as a seer. They could see things. Isn't that interesting?
It's a little more biblical and respectable somehow. And of course, one of the things they've done recently over the past, I would say 10 or 20 years is they've moved towards intuitive.
Yes, I've heard that.
I'm not psychic. I'm intuitive.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But is
that like Uri Geller, who calls himself a mystifier now, or something like that?
Right. I'm a mystifier. It's old wine in new bottles, and that's when, as you know, that's one thing that happens is that they repackage themselves however it's going to benefit them. If 20 years ago psychics were big and they were more acceptable, then they call themselves psychic. If next year they're mediums or intuitives, there you go.
There's lots of terms. And speaking of Uri Geller, and again, we just diverge a little bit, but that's fine. You and I last night were laughing ourselves silly because we were watching a video I brought you from my archives, Mindbender, from 1996, I think we discovered.
Yes, I was.
Starring Terence Stamp.
I was gobsmacked.
Yeah, and the story of Uri Geller.
The presumably true story of Uri Geller.
Directed by Ken Russell.
It was
extraordinary.
It was excruciating.
It was mind-bending.
It was. At first,
he's speechless. Folks.
No,
it
was the strangest things. I'd never heard of this thing before. And then so he pulls this thing up, and I'm watching this, and like, good God, what is this?
What is this?
And it's this again. It's this like. It's like something Dali would have done. It's just that it's not something that I would have.
Yeah. It is extraordinary.
And at the very end,
there's Geller himself, and he walks out on this stage, and he's encouraging us all to what are the watches, of course.
Yes, of course.
Take your watches out at home now. This is the part we both cracked up. Give it, hold your watch. It's a broken watch. Hold your watch. Look, if it's got a winding handle, wind it up, okay?
I'm like, can we rewind that? Did he just say to...
Wind your watch.
Wind your watch and shake it around, and if it starts ticking, clearly my psychic power... I'm like, wow, okay then. Thanks, Ken Russell.
That's it. Yeah. I don't know, folks, if you can ever get a chance to see it. Maybe I wouldn't advise you do. I mean,
or, just...
It's really bad. It's really bad. I mean, apart from anything else, apart from it painting Uri Geller in this fantastic, and he's driving a Jeep with a helmet on so he can't see, but he's getting psychic messages.
No, and just to be clear about the point of the film is that Uri Geller single-handedly saved the world.
Oh, yes.
At the end of the... No spoilers here. At the end of the show, we see him... There's nuclear missiles being launched.
From China, apparently.
From
or
China.
Somewhere like that.
And he uses the power of his mind to destroy a nuclear missile, thereby bringing about world peace.
And we're so grateful, and now we can start our watches.
Right. It's just
anyway. It was so funny to watch that with you. I'd seen it 10, 12 years ago, and I'd forgotten how truly appallingly awful it is.
In all regards, the production values, the acting, just really across the board, it is abysmal. But it's so wretched in its own way. It's like a train wreck.
It is. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, then.
With music by Elton John.
Elton John dream sequences. I mean, this is right for a Mystery Science 3000 drubbing. I mean,
think they should do it. I think they should do it. Mindbender, folks, that's the name of the movie. Well, we certainly veered a lot from our original point, which was about psychic detectives. But
yes.
It's great to chat with you, Ben, because we certainly have a lot of common knowledge. But we have our own special fields, of course. As you know, because I just told you, I'll be giving a talk on psychic detectives coming up at DragonCon later in August. So I'm looking forward to that. And folks, if you come to DragonCon, I'd love to see you there. Ben, again, I'll chat to you at the end of the show. We can tell the folks about our Chile experience.
Yes.
But for now, thank you very much for taking part in the Skeptic Zone.
Thanks for having me on.
Australian Skeptics present Skeptics in the Pub with Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki. Bookings are essential. Ask Dr. Karl. Thursday, the 4th of July from 6 p.m. at the Occidental Hotel, 43 York Street, Sydney. We will be having a special Q&A session with Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, one of Australia's leading science communicators. Come along, have fun, bring your questions on any topic. Bookings are essential. It's only $10 per person to cover costs. So that's Ask Dr. Karl at Sydney Skeptics in the Pub, Thursday the 4th of July from 6 p.m, and you can book by following the link in this week's show notes.
Hello, Skeptic Zone listeners. This is Susan Gerbic, and I am live from... What city are we in today?
We're in Los Angeles.
We're in Los Angeles, California, and I am at HowdyCon, which is a festival of ex-Scientology aficionados, I guess is what we would call them. These are people who have met on Tony Ortega's Underground Bunker blog. They get together. I think this is their third one, the first time in California. Fourth one, and this is the first time in California. They've been in Chicago and Cleveland and Denver, and this happens to be just about an hour from where I'm at. So I thought I'd come by and meet Tony Ortega in person. I'm hoping you're going to enjoy this, a little bit of back and forth. He has the Underground Bunker blog, which is essential reading every morning for me. It's all Scientology news, and he's recently been covering the court case of NXIVM, which was fascinating to listen to. So hi, Tony.
Susan, it's so good to get together with you. I love the work you do with skeptics, and what I want to say to skeptics in general is Scientology's king. Scientology is the king of pseudoscience. I don't want to hear any arguments. Scientology is the absolute peak and pinnacle of nonsense and hooey, and that's why skeptics should be reading The Underground Bunker.
Absolutely. As I say, I read it every morning when it comes out into my news feed, and I'm glued to it. And the NXIVM trial was so interesting. If you guys don't know what that is, it's spelled how?
NXIVM. And the reason I branched out to that recently was, people who watch I call them Scientology watchers, the people who read my... Some of them are ex-Scientologists, as you point out, but a lot of them aren't. We're all Scientology watchers. And what we're waiting for is for the government to step in and do some kind of investigation or even prosecution of Scientology because of its abuses. The reason why I branched out to NXIVM was the government actually was doing something about NXIVM, and they were prosecuting these people. And I wanted to see what that was like as, hopefully a dry run for what happens to Scientology someday. So we covered it very carefully. I have a wonderful correspondent named Diane Lipson. She was at the court every day giving me wonderful reports on the testimony. And I just think it was a wonderful experience in reporting and learning more about another high control group that treats people in just absolutely bizarre ways.
There was a lot of similarities between that and Scientology, at least as far as control of the followers.
All of these groups use the same techniques. They all use the same ways of controlling people, limiting their access to outside ideas, and specifically in NXIVM's case, Keith Raniere had stolen a lot of ideas from Scientology. He even used some of the same vocabulary. The big difference, the reason why people ask me if they can prosecute Keith Raniere, why can't they prosecute Scientology? The big difference between the two was that NXIVM never called itself a church and never got itself tax-exempt status. So it was a little easier for the government to investigate. But, even with NXIVM, there were complaints made to law enforcement for many, many years. But I think ultimately it was this news that leaked about women being branded. This was a line crossed that I think government could no longer ignore and led directly to this trial.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the other keys that really struck with the NXIVM trial was not like you said, the branding, but the photos. And there was also child pornography and just blatant control. And this is all more recent. I mean, NXIVM is only from what years?
NXIVM's been some version of NXIVM's been around since the 90s, but there had been some real reporting done about NXIVM and about Raniere. And you would think maybe they would dial things down, but instead they ratcheted it up. And they started this thing called DOS in, 2016 or something. And they called it a sorority for women. It was actually run by Raniere. It became this harem of sex slaves for him. And in order to enforce their loyalty, they were all required to turn in nude photographs of their genitals area. I mean, repeatedly. I mean, every month. And we just found out in the trial testimony, every time they got together, the first thing that these women had to do was all strip down, take pictures for Keith. So, this was one of the things that made the trial so remarkable is these were successful, accomplished women, and yet they were subjecting themselves to this bizarre treatment by this guy who most people look at him and think, this guy's a toad. I don't know about you, Susan, but this is one of the things that's so fascinating about these groups is that people seem to just give up all sort of rational thought, any kind of personal integrity, and we see it in Scientology as well. And there were a lot of parallels between NXIVM and Scientology.
People on Facebook, when I shared the trial, that the ending, well, we haven't seen the sentencing yet, but the guilty verdict, people were saying, well, how could people fall for this? And I keep saying that, nobody signs on saying, well, first off, some people are weeded out way at the beginning because they don't have the personality at that moment. It's not for them at that moment or whatever. And also, nobody signs in saying, hey, join our group. It's actually a cult. We're going to ask for your money and you're going to get branded in your genital area.
Right. It's the same thing with Scientology is... there's a lot of deception involved, and people are told that their communication is going to be improved by going through seminars. It's presented as a self-help thing. It's got the sort of gloss with the Hollywood celebrities and everything. How many people would join Scientology if they were told up front that ultimately you're going to be removing invisible alien souls that are attached to your body at about $800 an hour, and it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars? I mean, nobody would join if they were upfront about what they do. And that's my main beef with Scientology, with any of these groups, is that they're so deceptive.
And lose all your family in the meantime.
Right, and that's part of the control is if once you're completely hooked in, you need to remove everybody else in your life that's not hooked in, and that's very common with all of these groups, but particularly Scientology, and it's called their disconnection policy, and it's particularly cruel.
And we've been able to, on the GSOW project, which everybody listening knows quite well what that's about, has been able to contribute to a lot of the Wikipedia pages on Scientology. Some we've rewritten completely, and some we have just made additions to. And we have used Tony Ortega's blog many times on Wikipedia pages, which is really kind of fun because we rewrote Tony Ortega's Wikipedia page entirely. And whenever somebody has a really strong Wikipedia page, what happens is now they're able to be cited on other Wikipedia pages because they're a reputable source and it's like they have journalistic integrity and they're considered notable. So this is our way of fighting back and using the Wikipedia world, because we know that everybody does go to Wikipedia, and if they don't go there directly to the Wikipedia page to read it, then media are picking up on the Wikipedia pages that are written, and the public is getting information. We know hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views are coming to the Wikipedia pages each year. So we have to have these pages in great shape, otherwise people aren't getting as much education. And then we also need to have the backs of people like Tony Ortega and his popular blog, The Underground Bunker, which is near and dear to my heart because I run the Secret Cabal. So it's kind of a fun name. So what do you think about Scientology? It's been kind of fun to watch, well, fun in my world because I'm a never-in, to see it kind of slowly imploding. What do you think?
It's been in trouble for a long time, and they're getting really desperate with the people that have left. They're having staffing problems. But David Miscavige, one of his chief jobs as leader of the organization is to always hand or put on a show that things are still fine for the big donors. The big donors need to be convinced that the ideal orgs are expanding, that this organization is growing. So he puts on a show for them that nobody outside of Scientology buys for a minute. They are in big trouble. But, David Miscavige really doesn't need that many members. He just needs those wealthy donors. And so they have a huge slush fund. So I don't know that. I think he will be able to keep going for quite a while in the present state. These new lawsuits are very interesting. I think they're going to be a big problem for Scientology. But ultimately, I don't think things will significantly change until government decides to do something.
And there is something coming up. There is a court case, a lawsuit against Miscavige right now, right?
There is a legal dream team that has come together and has recruited a bunch of plaintiffs. We've seen the first lawsuit so far. There are many more coming. Some very fascinating plaintiffs coming up. I wish I could say something. I'll be able to say more in a couple weeks. Some really interesting people are going to be suing the Church of Scientology. And this team is definitely drawing a line in the sand, putting together a lot of plaintiffs. There's going to be huge media coverage of this. It'll be on my website. You can look it up. The Scientology has dealt with all of these allegations in the past. We know the kind of legal maneuvers they use. So it's going to be a fascinating fight. I mean, you used that word before. I mean, we're not personally invested. I'm just a reporter. I report it whichever way it goes. I'm really fascinated, but I know there are a lot of ex-members that have a lot personally invested in these lawsuits. They want to see Miscavige dragged into court and deposed. They want to see the church punished. And I think, this first lawsuit was filed by a Jane Doe. They're calling her, we know who it is, but she worked directly under Miscavige. She's got very good grounds for bringing him into the case and deposing him. She named him as a defendant. Now, Miscavige did get out of a deposition in Texas, even after a judge okayed it. But that woman that was suing in that case had a more tenuous connection to Miscavige. But this woman who's suing now, not only did she work for him, she was his personal steward and worked in his personal quarters day and night for 3 years.
This is going to be so interesting. You guys, you have to subscribe to Tony Ortega's Underground Bunker, and you will just be drawn into the giant rabbit hole of Scientology watching. And I've been doing this for years, and let me tell you, I'm excited. Well, I'm excited about everything, but this is going to be so much fun. So, Tony, real quick before we go, can you tell everybody the names of the books that you have written?
The Unbreakable Miss Lovely, which is my book about Paulette Cooper, a journalist who was probably the subject of the worst retaliation campaign in Scientology history. And then Paulette and I together teamed up to write a book called Battlefield Scientology, which is kind of the best of the reporting from the Underground Bunker with introductory essays by Paulette. And the website we've been talking about, the Underground Bunker, is TonyOrtega.org.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Psychon 2019. People are finally starting to wake up. Anti-vaxxers denounced as a danger to the public. Climate change deniers exposed as ideological zealots. Celebrity psychics have been caught red-handed using trickery. Homeopathy debunked as fake medicine. Flat earthers. Seriously? Skeptics must seize this moment. Now is the time for the brightest minds in science and reason to come together to turn the tide against pseudoscience, conspiracy theories, and alternative facts. And naturally, we should do it in Vegas. It's more fun that way. Now is the time for PsyCon 2019, October the 16th to the 20th at the Flamingo Resort in Las Vegas. The incredible lineup of speakers includes actor John Delancey of Star Trek and Breaking Bad, Julia Sweeney of SNL and Letting Go of God, string theory pioneer Brian Greene, evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, ex-naturopath Britt-Marie Hermes, and many more, including entertainment by illusionist Banachek and comedian Leanne Lord. For more information, visit www.csiconference.org.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Ben, that chili was just fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm still getting over it.
Oh, you'll be feeling it for a while now.
I hope so. What an interesting episode. Thank you for your help in the segment on the Psychic Detectives. And I remember appearing on TV, 10 years ago and debating, Simon Turnbull, who was the then president of the Australian Psychic Association. He's since died some about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was a classic case of no matter what I said, all he had to say was, well, of course psychics solve crimes. What are you talking about? And it's like, what do you say? I said, well, no, they don't. It's an urban myth. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Psychics solve...
Of course they do.
Yeah. And police use them all the time. They just don't want to admit it.
Yes, it's a conspiracy.
It's a conspiracy. My comeback on those occasions are, well, the police also use flying carpets, but they won't admit it. Prove me wrong, you know.
Right. Yes, I've encountered that a couple times myself, looking into the claims about psychic detectives, and they invoke this bizarre conspiracy theory that everybody knows that the police use psychics and it's all covered up. Like, well, why would they do that if you're giving them information? Then and furthermore, why wouldn't psychics simply become police officers?
Yeah, I know, and it goes on and on and on. But to explain that in a 5-minute studio interview, and when you have to give most of the time to the belief, anyway.
Of course they do. Boom,
boom.
Of course they do.
We've
Boom.
all been there. Coming up on next week's show, folks, a special report. I went to the Chabot Space and Science Centre in the Oakland Hills and had a wonderful private tour of the new Moon exhibition.
I'm looking forward to hearing about that. Yeah. I saw photos. I have not been there, but I want to.
It's spectacular. It's a special episode of the Skeptic Zone next week, and whatever else I can drag on. Well, once again, Ben, thank you very much. In a short while, once I recover from these chilies, we'll be starting to record a session of Squaring the Strange.
Yes, looking forward to it as well.
Me too. But for now, folks, this is Richard Saunders and
Ben Radford
signing off from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
Oh, she got my chin. Okay, that's more than we even need.
So to do that with a script would be silly.
Yeah.
I need to bounce off you, and you need to bounce off me. All right. So music.
Oh, do you want to check make sure it's okay?
Yeah. Why don't you press stop? Let's save that as a safety.
Let me just so let's stop.
I can't see. Yeah, try it.
Red one.
Yeah.
Stop.